The baby boomers are right now in their 20s and their 30s. They're at the peak of their consumption, and that consumption is driving our economy right now. If it wasn't for millennial consumption since 2007, we would have already had at least 3 recessions. In addition, in 10 years, the oldest millennials will be in their 50s. I don't know about you, but I cannot wait to see the millennials having midlife crises. But that means they're going to be entering that capital-rich period of their life, replacing the boomers as the source of capital. Gen X is just too small. And perhaps even more importantly, the millennials, late start, are finally having kids in number, which means in 20 years, their kids will start entering the labor force in numbers. All we have to do to get back to 2019 capital and labor environment is wait 10 years for finance and 20 years for labor. That's it. We just have to wait 10 years. Yeah. But check out Germany. Bottom fell out of the birth rate 70 years ago. They ran out of kids 30 years ago. And this decade, that big bulge moves into mass retirement. The German economic model was always going to collapse this decade. The Ukraine war is just speeding it up. And then there's China. That is already the fastest aging workforce on record in human history. And we now know that that data is wrong. A little over a year ago, the Chinese admitted publicly that they had overcounted their population by in excess of 100 million people. With all of the missing millions, people who would have been born under the one-child system, meaning that they're all 40 and under. Suggesting that these yellow bars, those yellow bars don't even exist. We don't have an economic model. Humans don't have an economic model for how that might work in the year 2030. This is China's last decade, period. I could give you 6 other reasons why China's going to collapse. But this is the one that is completely unavoidable. There is no policy that can be adopted by any combination of countries that can save them from this. All right, let's talk about you. These solid red lines are where the urban center stops because of geography. The dotted are where the cost of expansion goes up. Check out you guys in the middle. I mean, yes, you've got like a protected wetland right there, but honestly, it's so small you can go around it. One of the big things to keep in mind if your intent is to change the economic destiny of your locality is, taking an accurate stock of your assets and your liabilities and taking a really good hard look at your local geography and your regional geography. And in your case, there are no real limits to where you can go. You've got some of the cheapest land in the country. You've got access to a river, but there are a couple of problems. The first one, the most significant one, is you're close to New Orleans. And that's not because everyone's going to go party there on a Thursday. No. The problem is New Orleans is the world's largest bulk export terminal. And so anything that was in about 600 miles of it, the decision has been made over and over and over and over to just not move up the value-added chain. Produce a raw commodity, ship it to New Orleans, they send it over the horizon, and that's the end of the story. It's cheap, it's easy, it's boring, and it limits what you can do. Now I want to compare a few other zones that I've worked with in the past, just to give you an idea. So this is the Pacific Northwest, specifically Portland and Seattle. And you'll notice that there's not a lot that they can do to expand, especially Seattle. Seattle's on an isthmus. As a result, land prices are ridiculous. And if everyone has $1 million efficiency condo, because that's the low end in the market, then if you have 1% spare capital, that adds up to a lot of cash real quick. So the Pacific Northwest has got to go not just up the manufacturing scale, because most manufacturing just isn't viable in that market. They've gotten into IT in a very big way. This probably isn't the model for you. I mean, does everyone you know just have a spare $100,000 lying around? Because that's what it takes. I will never tell urban centers to not go into STEM and not try to do stuff with tech, but if you want to do it at scale, I just don't think you have the capital structure for it because your land is simply too affordable. They went into tech not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. There was nothing else they could try. Charleston. Very similar to the PNW in terms of its inability to expand. They basically live between two rivers. And so they have struck on a double strategy. Number one, they've come up with a really creative way to train their workforce. When they find an investor, they ask what specific jobs need to be filled. And then they work with the state of South Carolina to train up a half a dozen people for each theoretical position. And then they allow the would-be investor to interview them. And if they hire anyone from their pool, the government gets paid a fee to compensate for the cost of the training. And the company gets a ready-made workforce. That's part one. Part two is they convince somebody else to pay for it all. They can do that because they can draw from the populations in upstate, or excuse me, they don't call it upstate there, in-state South Carolina, and they're an ocean port. Why is the ocean port important? Because of what is arguably the dumbest law we have in the United States today. The Jones Act was passed during the Great Depression. The idea was to protect American positions in maritime commerce. And it says that no cargo can be transported between any two American ports unless the ship carrying the cargo is American built, owned, captained, and crewed. As a result, shipments between American ports has dropped by 99% in value over the last century. And one of the reasons you guys do not see ships on the Red River every single minute is because of that law. But foreign ships that come to a port are exempt, so they all go to New Orleans. Any American port on a river has basically been gutted because of this law. So I've been fighting this very lonely one-man war against this stupid law for so long. I honestly think that the Jones Act is the single biggest problem facing American development moving forward. And it's certainly a big issue for you because it means you can't follow the Charleston model because ocean-going vessels can't get this far. You need to have an American ship. And before you think, well, I like the idea of American ships, can you imagine if we did this for any other mode of cargo? Air, that would remove 30% to 50% of the planes in the air. Truck, that would remove 80% of them. Train, over half. We only do this for our most efficient method of transport. That is the very definition of idiocy from my point of view. So yeah, talk to your senator to get rid of that. In the meantime, it's important to understand that you shouldn't trust Texas. Folks, that's 15 million people with a lot of space to expand. And they're slowly metabolizing all the land that's between the four triangle cities. And even with that, the reindustrialization of North America has been going so far. I mean, this isn't a new thing. We've been industrializing at ever-growing pace for about 10 years now. Without the Chinese and the Germans being on the skids, we probably need to double the size of the industrial plant in the United States within the next 5 years, assuming we still want stuff. Americans really like stuff. But Texas, you're a minnow, and you're a ways out. Texas is experiencing labor shortages. The two ways where they're dealing with is by having a 0% income tax to attract more folks in, and by reaching out and holding their nose when they do it and integrating with Oklahoma. Let me underline that. Texas is integrating with Oklahoma on purpose. But OKC and Tulsa have 10 times your population. There's an economy of scale there that you can't match. And if you do manage to integrate yourself into the triangle, it's part of a very dynamic system. It's the fastest growing part of the country. Will be for 30 years. But you're a ways out, and you don't get much of a vote in how it goes.